Hello there, people of the internet. I have made a ton of videos talking about 8mm Mauser, but you know what? I'm going to go ahead and make myself another one. Right as I start talking is when the bugs start freaking out. So I'm out here with my Yugo 2447, and we're going to go ahead and send some lead downrange here in a minute after we talk about the cartridge a little bit. However, if you like content like this, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel because you are in the right crowd. I talk about things like this all the time. So 8mm Mauser is one of my all-time favorite cartridges, hands down, bar none. I can't get enough of it. I'm to the point to where I'm buying like cheap sporterized Mausers anytime I can get my hands on them just because I love the cartridge so incredibly much. Early versions of the 8mm Mauser rifle, or the 8mm Mauser cartridge, were actually a 318 diameter bullet, and they were a round nose bullet. Back during the time of, say, the Commission 88 rifle, round nose ammunition was very common during that particular time period. Countries were moving from black powder to smokeless powder, and they were still trying to figure out the best ways to do certain things. And the idea of having a Spitzer cartridge with your smokeless powder round really was not all that predominant as of yet. However, fast forward a couple of years, I can't quite remember, I think it was 1906, if memory serves me correctly, where that 8mm Mauser round was updated. Well, that can't be right, because this 8mm Mauser round was for the 1898 pattern. So sometime before 1898, the 8mm Mauser round was updated to take a 323 diameter round. So that is going to be a little bit larger of a diameter than your 318 original round. However, that little tiny difference of a few thousandths of an inch is not going to be noticeable to the naked eye. You would need like specialized hardware to be able to figure out the differences between those two projectiles. But 8mm Mauser ammunition, what this stuff is and what it does is absolutely incredible. This right here will send a 155 grain projectile, which is what this is right here. This is Turkish surplus. A 155 grain projectile at about 3,000 feet per second, which is quite the hefty projectile, traveling very, very, very rapidly. For a little bit of context behind that, 223/556 ammunition that we use in modern day, that will send a 55 grain projectile traveling at 3,200 feet per second, or a 62 grain projectile traveling at about that 3,000 feet per second mark. 556 gets all of its energy from velocity and not from its weight. Being 55 grain projectile, it's only about a third of the weight of this 150 grain projectile. Now, all of that being said, this 8mm Mauser round is sending 3 times the bullet at the same velocity as 223, which relies on velocity to get its power. So this has both velocity and mass. It is an incredibly powerful cartridge. So along with a 155 grain projectile at 3,000 feet per second, it will also send a 198 grain projectile, which is a quite hefty, quite large projectile at about 2,600 or so feet per second. Now, of course, with modern propellants and whatnot, you can hot rod these rounds to be able to travel significantly faster than that. But for your standard military base loadings, which is what you would want to fire out of your old military surplus rifles, which is what I tend to use because I'm a military surplus kind of guy, that right there is about the velocities that you could come to expect. Now, I've made, like I said, a ton of videos on all sorts of subjects whenever it comes to 8mm Mauser. Like I also just said, I can't seem to get enough of this cartridge. The 8mm Mauser is actually the parent case for many, many, many other kinds of cartridges out there. As a matter of fact, this right here is one of the parent cases and inspirations for the 7mm Mauser, which came about in approximately 1893, I believe, for Mauser's 1893 rifles. I know the 1891 was a 7.65 round, so I'm going to go with about the time period of 1893 is when 7mm Mauser start to make its debut. 7mm Mauser went up against 30-40 Krag and absolutely kicked the living snot out of it for both the Mauser platform and the cartridge and the capabilities of that 7mm Mauser cartridge. I just had something fly into my mouth. Don't you just love Florida? Reminds me of Friday nights back in high school. Anyway, that 7mm Mauser actually gave way to 30-06, which gave way to a whole boatload of cartridges, like, 270 and 308 Winchester, and insert your choice of cartridge here. As a matter of fact, 308 Winchester gave way to a good number of different cartridges. So 7mm Mauser and 8mm Mauser are kind of where a very large branch of different cartridges really began to take form in. So there's a huge amount of history behind these cartridges, along with a huge amount of development that stems from these cartridges and their capabilities. But even with all the development that we see come from these cartridges, 7mm and 8mm Mauser, the original cartridges themselves are still dramatically capable, even by today's standards, to send a nearly, I almost said a 200 grain projectile, a nearly 200 grain projectile at 2,600 feet per second from the 1890s. That is an incredibly amazing feat of ingenuity that requires some significantly intelligent people to be able to design and engineer and pull off a rifle and cartridge system that is capable of doing those sorts of things. And it is to the point to where many of our modern designs are actually based off of Mauser's old designs, and many of our modern cartridges can be branched back to many of those old Mauser designs. It really is amazing just how Mauser set the footwork for so much development and so much that has happened ever since his creations had come out. So speaking of sending lead downrange, I got a couple of rounds here. No guarantee that they'll actually go off, but you know what? Let's pull the trigger and find out. This is Turkish surplus ammo from the 1930s. This stuff is a little hotter, higher pressure than normal. From what I can tell, pre-World War II and whatnot, tends to fire more around 3,200 feet per second or so, depending on the batches that you get. So that's a little bit spicier than what is actually intended, but this nice strong Mauser 98 action should be able to handle that no problem. Oh yeah, but boy, is there quite a bit of recoil behind these cartridges. That 155 grain projectile traveling at that velocity, that definitely takes quite a bit of oomph out of the shoulder. I have batches of later forms of this ammo, and it doesn't recoil nearly as hard as this 1930s production stuff does. Let's send one more round downrange. All that fired admirably without any issue whatsoever. There are a ton of different rifles out there chambered in 8mm Mauser of all sorts of different varieties. Your most common ones are going to be your 98 actions, but there are 93 actions out there that can be found in 8mm Mauser. As a matter of fact, I got a 93 Turkish action chambered in 8mm Mauser. It was a conversion from 7.65 Argentine. But if you want long rifles, then you can go out and get yourself long rifles. If you want nice short carbine versions, then you can go out and get yourself nice short carbine versions, all chambered in 8mm Mauser. If you want military surplus, you can go out and get yourself military surplus. You want rifles with iron sights, go out and get yourself rifles with iron sights. If you want modern rifles with polymer stocks and rail systems and all the goodies that you can get, they still make those in 8mm Mauser as well. So feel free to go pick yourself up pretty much anything it is that you want in 8mm Mauser. Now, 8mm Mauser is an incredible round, yes, but it is not a, how would I say this? It does not stand alone whenever it comes to rifle cartridges for the time period that it came out. As a matter of fact, I've actually got a Mauser M44. This is chambered in 7.62 by 54 rimmed, which came about the year 1891. However, unlike 7.62 by 54 rimmed, unlike 8mm Mauser, 7.62 by 54 rim does not have a whole variety of different cartridges that have came out and branched off of it, especially not near to the success of things like 30-06 and 308 and things like that. 7.62 by 7.62 by 54 rimmed is kind of its own beast, and it is still in use in modern militaries to this day, all across the world, mostly in your comm block countries. But what this is it sends about a 150 grain bullet. I think it stems more along the lines of 148 grain or so, at about 2,800 feet per second out of a full-length rifle. So it is going to be slightly less powerful than 8mm Mauser, but that slightly less power isn't going to be substantial enough to really make all that much of a difference. So that's one thing I really do like about 8mm Mauser. It really is on par with like cartridges that are larger and more powerful and more capable. Like for example, 30-06. 30-06 for the time period, like let's say 30-06 in World War II, M2 ball, that sent a 150 grain bullet at about 2,800 feet per second. That's on par with the Mauser Nagant's 7.62x54 rimmed. However, there's a downgraded version of 30-06. If we start to look at more commercially available versions of 30-06, it sends that 150 grain pill at about 3,000 feet per second, which is about on par with 8mm Mauser. So 8mm Mauser is a shorter throw cartridge. I mean, it's still a full power, full size rifle cartridge, but it is shorter than the 30-06 and a larger diameter, and oftentimes fires larger bullets more effectively and more efficiently than something like 30-06. You can get a lot of horsepower out of 8mm Mauser. It really is an incredible cartridge, and it definitely holds quite a beautiful place in my heart. So all of this being said, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you ever so much for watching. Like I said before, if you like these kinds of things, you are among the right crowd, because we all like these kinds of things. So thanks for watching. Appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go and go check it out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day, and I will see you guys on the next episode. Since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garrett. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.